I never wanted to be one of those people, the kind who spends their weekends yelling at city officials, citing property laws, and threatening lawsuits. I liked my peace, my quiet, and my fully paid-off home that sat just outside the grasping claws of the neighborhood HOA. At least, I thought it was outside their grasp. It started with a letter. A crisp, white envelope with an official-looking header was stuffed into my mailbox, nestled between junk mail and a flyer for a lost cat named Mittens. I almost ignored it. I wish I had, because the moment I tore it open, my heart dropped into my stomach. Notice of abandonment and property sale. My house, was listed as abandoned, and, apparently, it had been sold. I had to read it 3 times before my brain caught up. My address, my name, a sale finalized through the HOA, citing their right to reclaim and reallocate properties left unattended for extended periods. I wasn't even in the HOA. I gripped the paper so hard it crumpled in my fingers. This had to be a mistake. A typo. A joke? Maybe I was on some weird hidden camera prank show. I turned the letter over, half expecting to see a smirking TV host pop out from behind a bush. Nothing. Just the smug, stamped insignia of the West Haven HOA, an organization I had spent years carefully avoiding. I stormed inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the number listed on the letter. The phone rang twice before a voice, sugary sweet and dripping with condescension, answered. West Haven HOA office, this is Karen speaking. How can I assist you? I took a deep breath. Yeah, hi. I got a letter saying my house was abandoned and that it's been sold. That's got to be a mistake because I live here. A pause. Papers rustling. Then, may I have your address? I gave it. Another pause. More rustling. A clicking sound, keyboard typing. Then Karen hummed, like she'd just found something juicy. Oh, yes. 241 Oak Ridge Lane. That property was flagged as abandoned 6 months ago. The sale was finalized last week. Congratulations to the new owners. I nearly dropped the phone. Flagged as abandoned? I've been living here the entire time. Who the hell decided my house was abandoned? Karen sighed, the way you do when explaining something obvious to a particularly dense toddler. The HOA has a duty to maintain the integrity of the neighborhood. When a property appears neglected, overgrown lawn, uncollected mail, lack of resident activity, we are authorized to reclaim it. Since no one contested the notices, the sale proceeded. Notices? What notices? I clenched my jaw. I never received a single notice. A fake gasp. Oh dear, that's quite unusual. But the sale is final. There's nothing we can do. I wanted to reach through the phone and strangle her. You can do something. You can undo this insanity. I am not part of the HOA. You have no right to sell my house. Karen chuckled. Oh, but you are part of the HOA. Your property falls under the expanded jurisdiction added last year. It's all perfectly legal. Expanded jurisdiction? My head spun. They expanded their reach and just decided I was now under their rule? Send me the documents. Now. Karen sighed again. Sir, you should have read them when they were posted. Send me the documents. Fine, she said, her voice losing its artificial politeness. But I assure you, there's nothing you can do. I hung up, heart pounding. Within minutes, an email popped up. Attached were dozens of pages, meeting minutes, amendments, and a so-called community vote approving the HOA's expansion. Buried in the fine print was a clause claiming that properties within the new jurisdiction automatically fell under HOA governance unless contested within 90 days. And, of course, I had never received a single notification. But the real kicker? The sale had been to a board member's nephew. Oh, they were going to regret this. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours digging through every document Karen had sent me, my eyes burning from staring at my laptop screen for too long. The more I read, the more I wanted to put my fist through a wall. The HOA had basically pulled a legal heist. They had annexed my property without my knowledge, labeled it as abandoned, without any real inspection, and then sold it to some board member's nephew for pennies on the dollar. This wasn't just shady. It was outright fraud. By sunrise, I had a plan. First, I needed proof that I'd been living here. That part was easy: utility bills, tax records, security camera footage, and even a damn Amazon delivery with a timestamp from last week. I compiled everything into a folder. Next, I called a real estate attorney. After 3 rejections from lawyers who didn't handle HOA disputes, cowards, I finally got a call back from Elliot Grayson, a guy who specialized in exactly this kind of mess. I explained everything. He listened in silence before letting out a low whistle. Damn, they really went for it. Yeah, I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. Can they do this? In theory? Only if you legally became part of the HOA and truly abandoned the property. But from what you're telling me, they failed on both counts. So what do I do? We fight, Elliot said simply. First, we challenge the sale. If they didn't notify you properly, it's void. Second, we expose their fraud. If they knowingly sold an occupied home under false pretenses, they could be looking at criminal charges. I felt a flicker of hope. What do you need from me? Everything you've got. Proof of residency, past correspondence, photos, videos, statements from neighbors. I also want to see the HOA's bylaws and any records of that so-called expansion. Done. When can we meet? I have an opening at noon. I'll be there. Before meeting Elliot, I made one important stop. I wasn't about to let Karen and her clipboard army think I was rolling over and accepting this. Oh no. They were about to see exactly what kind of problem they had just created for themselves. The HOA office was in the neighborhood's so-called community center, a bland beige building that looked like a rejected dentist's office. I stormed in, and there, behind the front desk, sat Karen, the queen of suburban tyranny herself. She looked up and gave me the fakest, most insufferable smile I'd ever seen. Mr. Hayes, what a surprise. I assume you're here to turn in your keys. Oh, I hated her. I slapped a thick folder of documents onto her desk. Actually, I'm here to let you know that I'm taking this to court. Your sale is illegal. Your jurisdiction grab is illegal. And if you don't reverse this immediately, you and the rest of the HOA board will be facing lawsuits. Karen blinked. Then she laughed. Like, full-on laughed in my face. Oh, Mr. Hayes, she said, shaking her head. You're fighting a losing battle. The sale is final. You can try to sue, but I assure you, our legal team is more than prepared. I gritted my teeth. Then I hope they're ready for fraud charges. Because that's what you committed. Her smirk twitched, just for a second. Is that so? Yeah, it is. And when I'm done with you, you'll be lucky if you're still in charge of filing HOA newsletters. Karen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Let me give you some advice, Mr. Hayes. Walk away. This isn't a fight you can win. I held her gaze. Watch me. Then I turned and walked out. I met with Elliot at noon, and by the time I left his office, I had a full legal battle plan in motion. First step, a cease and desist letter to put the brakes on the sale. Second step, a formal complaint to the State Real Estate Commission exposing the fraudulent transaction. Third step, media exposure. Nothing gets HOA Karen scrambling like bad press. And as I drove home, one thing became very, very clear. This was war. By the next morning, Elliot had already fired off the cease and desist letter to both the HOA and the so-called buyer of my house. Legally, they were now on notice. If they tried to move forward with the sale or attempted to evict me, they'd be in serious trouble. But I wasn't about to stop there. If Karen and her HOA cronies thought they could just bulldoze me into submission, they were dead wrong. I spent the next few hours calling every neighbor I knew, especially the ones who'd had run-ins with the HOA before. And oh boy, I wasn't the only one with a grudge. Turns out, the West Haven HOA had been pulling all kinds of shady crap over the years. Finding people for unauthorized paint colors, even though they weren't in the HOA. Harassing elderly residents with fake violations until they paid thousands in bogus fees. Threatening foreclosure over unpaid dues from people who had never agreed to be members in the first place. The more I dug, the worse it got. One guy, Tom, had been fighting a bogus fence violation fine for 2 years. Another neighbor, Mrs. Patel, nearly lost her entire savings to a lien the HOA slapped on her house for late payments on dues she never actually owed. I wasn't just dealing with a corrupt HOA. I was dealing with a full-blown criminal operation. And that's when the idea hit me. See, HOAs thrive on secrecy. They rely on people either being too scared or too exhausted to fight back. But if there's one thing HOA bullies hate, it's bad press. So I made some calls. A local news station was more than happy to hear about an HOA trying to steal someone's house. Then I reached out to a real estate watchdog group that specialized in exposing predatory HOAs. And just for fun, I posted a detailed breakdown of the scam on our town's Facebook page. The response was instant chaos. People were furious. The post exploded with comments from others who had been bullied by the HOA, and within hours, the local news station contacted me for an interview. Karen and her little clipboard army were about to have their worst day ever. I was outside watering my lawn, which, by the way, was perfectly maintained, despite their fake neglect claims, when I saw Karen marching up my driveway. Behind her, 2 HOA board members and a guy in a suit, probably their lawyer. She looked pissed. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice all sugary venom. "We need to talk." I crossed my arms. "About how you illegally sold my house." Karen's eye twitched. "That post you made is highly inappropriate. You're spreading misinformation." "Really?" I pulled out my phone. "Because I have legal documents, security footage, and witness statements that say otherwise." The suit guy cleared his throat. "Mr. Hayes, we'd like to resolve this amicably." "Oh, now you want to be amicable?" I laughed. "Didn't seem that way when you tried to steal my house." Karen's fake smile barely held. "There's no need to escalate this." No, I said, shaking my head. "See, I love escalation. That's why I called the news. And a lawyer. And the real estate commission. And the state attorney general's office." Karen paled. The board members behind her started whispering to each other. The suit guy turned to her. "You didn't mention anything about." I smirked. "Oh, she didn't tell you?" "Yeah, this little scam of yours. It's about to be very public." Karen opened her mouth, probably to spout more BS, but I held up a hand. "I'll make this simple," I said. "You're going to reverse the sale. You're going to admit you never properly notified me. And then you're going to leave me the hell alone." Karen's hands clenched into fists. "We'll. And if you don't," I continued, stepping closer, "I'll make sure every single person in this neighborhood, every news station, and every legal authority knows exactly how deep your fraud goes. Your little HOA will not survive this." Silence. Then Karen spun on her heel and stormed off. The board members trailed behind her, whispering frantically. The lawyer just sighed and followed. I watched them go, grinning. Checkmate. But I wasn't done yet. Now, it was time to finish them. I barely had time to enjoy my small victory before the media storm hit. That evening, the local news station ran the story. HOA illegally sells man's home. Owner fights back. They interviewed me, along with several other residents who had been bullied, extorted, and harassed by the West Haven HOA. And let me tell you, it was brutal. Mrs. Patel broke down on camera, explaining how Karen and her goons had nearly bankrupted her over fake fines. Tom showed a stack of bogus violation notices he'd collected over the years, so many that it looked like he was holding a novel-length HOA horror story. A former HOA board member even came forward, spilling the beans about their shady inner workings, including how they intentionally withheld notices to justify seizing properties. By the next morning, the Facebook post had thousands of shares, and people were furious. The HOA's office was flooded with calls and emails, and residents were already talking about removing the entire board. But the best part? Elliot, my lawyer, called me with game-changing news. Elliot had been digging through property records, and guess what? The HOA didn't even have the authority to sell my house in the first place. Under state law, even if an HOA could seize a property, which was already questionable, they were required to file a claim with the county before attempting a sale. And, surprise, surprise, they hadn't. Which meant the entire sale was legally invalid. "The title transfer is worthless," Elliot explained, barely containing his excitement. "The buyer doesn't actually own your house. And since he's related to a board member, we might even have a case for conspiracy to commit fraud." I almost felt bad for the poor idiot who thought he was getting a cheap house. Almost. But my focus was still on Karen, because she wasn't going down without a fight. That afternoon, I got a knock at my door. It was a process server, with an official eviction notice. Karen was trying to forcibly remove me from my own home. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. See, this was her final, desperate attempt to save face. She knew the sale was illegal. She knew she was losing control of the situation. But instead of admitting defeat, she doubled down, hoping to intimidate me into backing off. Big mistake. I called Elliot, and he shut that down instantly. He filed an emergency injunction, blocking any eviction proceedings before they even started. Then he filed a lawsuit against the HOA for fraud, damages, and illegal property seizure. And then, just for good measure, he reported them to the state's housing authority. Oh, and remember that news station? They ran another segment that night, this time about how the HOA was trying to illegally evict me even after getting caught committing fraud. Karen must have been screaming at her TV, because the next morning, the real fireworks started. By 9 a.m., I got a call from Tom. Dude, he said, barely containing his glee. Karen just resigned. I nearly dropped my coffee. What? She quit. The board had an emergency meeting, and people were furious. Half the board turned on her to save themselves. I checked news and, yep, there it was. A formal statement from the HOA announcing that Karen had stepped down due to personal reasons. Translation? She got forced out to avoid an even bigger scandal. And it got better. The HOA's lawyer also resigned, probably because he realized he was defending actual criminals. The remaining board members were scrambling, with homeowners now demanding a complete overhaul of the HOA. And the State Real Estate Commission launched a full investigation, which meant some of these clowns were about to face real legal consequences. But the cherry on top? The bogus sale of my house was officially voided. I wasn't just getting my home back. I was about to watch the entire HOA burn to the ground. And I still had one last move to play. Karen was gone. The HOA was in full meltdown mode. And my house. Officially mine again. But I wasn't done yet. See, it wasn't enough that Karen got booted from her clipboard throne. It wasn't enough that the HOA was collapsing. These people had tried to steal my home, ruin my life, and intimidate me into backing down. They deserved real consequences. With the sale officially voided, Elliot wasted no time hitting them where it hurt. We sued the HOA and individual board members for fraudulent property seizure, emotional distress, legal fees and damages. And since Karen and her cronies had knowingly filed false documents, the county prosecutor got involved. Criminal charges were now on the table. This wasn't just about money anymore. People were going to jail. After Karen resigned, the remaining board members tried to save themselves. They held an emergency vote to keep the HOA running, but at this point, the neighborhood was done with them. Over 80% of the homeowners voted to dissolve the HOA completely. Within 2 months, the West Haven HOA was officially disbanded. No more bogus fines. No more corrupt board members. No more clipboard tyrants. For the first time in years, people could actually live in peace. And now, for my favorite part. Karen didn't just lose her precious HOA title. She lost everything. She was personally sued for her role in the fraud. She was blacklisted from working with any future HOAs. She had to sell her own house to pay off legal fees. Oh, and remember how she tried to sell my house to her nephew? That backfired spectacularly. Because once the fraud was exposed, he lost the house and his deposit. Turns out, when you try to buy stolen property, you don't get to keep it. And the best part? Karen got charged with real estate fraud. Last I heard, she was facing a possible conviction, and even if she avoided jail, she'd be paying off fines for years. A few months later, I was sitting on my fully paid-off porch, enjoying the peaceful, HOA-free neighborhood, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Tom. Bro, look at this. Attached was a listing for a small rental property. The landlord? Karen. She had gone from HOA queen to struggling landlord. I laughed so hard I almost fell out of my chair. This woman had tried to steal my home. And now? She didn't even have one of her own. Justice. And if any future clipboard warriors thought they could pull something like this again, they'd learn real fast. I don't lose. Thank you for being with us. Please share in the comments where you are watching from and whether you liked everything, and see you next time.